We're going to start covering chapter 12, section 3. And first thing we're going to look at.
You gotta be super smart to count.
Watch the mail for that invitation to the wedding.
Is we're going to look at what was known as Teddy Roosevelt's big stick policy. Now, I believe with period 1, I started to introduce this, but in 1900, the election of 1900, William McKinley runs against William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan is from Nebraska. William Jennings Bryan has a unique distinction when it comes to the presidency and attempts to become president. He is the only individual to run for president 3 times, and we should know this, we've never had a president with the last name of Bryan, so that means he lost all 3 times. So it's not a distinction you really want to be known for, running for president that many times and losing. Now, Teddy Roosevelt is seen as a very upbeat individual. Not only was he a very upbeat individual, he was very well liked within the Republican Party. And the people in the United States liked him. They just liked his enthusiasm, how aggressive he was. But the problem was, Roosevelt could be a little bit of a loose cannon at times. And so the Republican Party thought, what can we do to keep Roosevelt involved in the Republican Party, but yet get him in a position where he can really kind of be kept under wraps, so to speak, where he's doing his job to help the party, but he's not rocking the boat too much. So the Republicans thought and they thought and they thought, and finally they said, I know, let's have him be vice president. Now think about it. How many of you know who our vice president is? Okay? I'm going to stop this. I'm going to pause this for about 5 seconds. And what I want you to do is think about, without searching it somewhere, without talking to someone, think of who the vice president is. And if you know who it is, raise your hand. Okay? I'm going to pause it right now. Now, someone who knows who it is. And I want you to look at how many people have their hand up. Okay? Now, it hasn't been that long ago since we had an election. Okay? And if you didn't know who it is, Mike Pence is our vice president. Now, even though I'm not there, I'm going to guess that less than half the people in the classroom knew who our vice president was. I guarantee if you walk down any street in America and you go up to someone and ask them, who is our vice president, less than 50% are going to know. And the further we get into 2018 and when we're in early 2019, even fewer people are going to know. Because Mike Pence is someone that you just don't hear about a lot. That's the point I'm trying to make. Make Roosevelt vice president, and he's still an integral part of the Republican Party, but he's so behind the scenes, no one really knows who he is. And so McKinley gets elected, Roosevelt's vice president. Plan is working like clockwork. McKinley goes to the Pan American Exposition, which is in Buffalo, New York. And while he's at the Pan American Exposition, he there's going to be a session where people can stand in line and meet the president, kind of like a little meet and greet thing. Well, there is an individual standing in line. His name is Leon Czolgosz. Czolgosz is a disgruntled immigrant. He's here from like Bulgaria or Romania, some part, that part of the world, and he's upset because there's such a disparity between the haves and the have-nots in the United States as he sees it. And like with so many things, when people get unhappy about how something is in the U.S., they blame the president. So he's standing in line and he has his hand bandaged up as if he had hurt it. And he walks up to shake McKinley's hand. Well, within the bandages is a small revolver, and as he lifts his right hand up to shake his hand, he fires 2 shots at McKinley and kills him. Now, Roosevelt is president, and the Republicans are like, oh crap, what just happened?
Theodore Roosevelt was the 26th and youngest president of the United States. He forever changed what it meant to be president.
Theodore Roosevelt was the first truly modern American president. He expanded the power of the presidency dramatically. He used executive orders and presidential proclamations in ways that had never been done before.
Theodore Roosevelt Jr. was born on October 27, 1858, in New York City to an affluent family. As a youth, he was homeschooled due to chronic illness, but compensated through strenuous exercise. He graduated from Harvard in 1880, studied at Columbia Law School, and married Alice Lee.
Theodore Roosevelt dropped out of law school and entered politics, joining the New York Assembly, but soon thereafter lost his mother and his wife on the same day. Utterly devastated, Roosevelt left his young daughter with his sister and left for the Badlands of North Dakota to start anew.
In 1886, Roosevelt returned to New York and unsuccessfully ran for mayor. During this time, he married his second wife, Edith Kermit Caro, with whom he had 5 children. In 1897, he was appointed U.S. Navy Assistant Secretary under President William McKinley.
In 1898, at the start of the Spanish-American War, Roosevelt resigned his position and formed and equipped a cavalry unit known as the Rough Riders. Roosevelt led the unit in Cuba and gained fame for his attack up Kettle Hill during the Battle of San Juan Hill.
Returning home a National War hero, Roosevelt was elected governor of New York in 1898, and in 1900 became Vice President of the United States under President McKinley, whose assassination less than a year later ushered Roosevelt into the presidency.
Theodore Roosevelt had a domestic policy proposal known as the Square Deal. He wanted to offer consumer protections. He wanted to protect the middle class. He was the first president to use the power of the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up monopolies.
In 1904, Roosevelt was elected president in his own right. He beefed up the U.S. Navy, completed the Panama Canal, and received the Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating the end of the Russo-Japanese War in 1906.
President Roosevelt announced the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, that the United States could intervene in the affairs of Central and South American countries.
Roosevelt would often say that the government needed to, what he called, carry a big stick, which meant the threat of force in order to make sure that things worked well in terms of foreign policy.
He was always in motion, always doing something. He had tremendous energy. He is the first president to be known for bringing his children into the White House and interrupting affairs, playing with children.
Teddy Roosevelt was one of the founders of the modern environmental movement. Because of him, something like 200 million acres of land is still wilderness today.
Roosevelt left office in 1909 and went on safari in Africa for 2 years. Upon his return, unhappy with President Taft, the man he had groomed for the office, Roosevelt ran against him in 1912, forming a third political party to do so. The popular election was close, but he lost.
Following his departure from politics, Theodore Roosevelt wrote books, traveled the world, and when World War I broke out, offered to raise a division to go to Europe and was turned down by President Wilson.
Theodore Roosevelt died in his sleep on January 6, 1919, at his Long Island estate, Sagamore Hill. He was 60 years old.
Theodore Roosevelt and the course that he set for the country helped catapult the nation to the forefront of the great powers of the world.
Boo, frickety hoo! I had the best grades in the class and I didn't get diddly squat!
Okay, so there's some info on Roosevelt. So, Roosevelt becomes president, and, right away, Roosevelt's going to carve his own niche. The thing about Roosevelt is he was a hawk on war, which means he's someone that advocated war. He was in favor of it, and yet he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was an avid outdoorsman. He loved to hunt, and yet he set aside more land to as nature preserves and wildlife refuges than any other president. He took vast areas of the southwestern part of the United States, which were considered to be just barren wasteland, and they were turned into very profitable farming areas. As soon as Roosevelt got done with something, he just moved right on to his next objective. He wasted no time. And some say that, he was wired because the guy drank like a gallon of coffee a day. And so he was just, constantly like just some squirrel running all over the place in the fall trying to gather up as many nuts as they can. So one of the things that Roosevelt wants to do is he wants the United States to continue to trade. So he sends his Secretary of State, John Hay, over to China. But see, the problem with China is that a lot of other European countries have already beat the U.S. there. And so they get there, U.S. gets there, and these other countries have created what's called a sphere of influence. And what this means is that the United States, that, for example, you have Germany and England and the Dutch and the French, and they can only trade within the area they control. So Germany, if they're bringing something into China, it can only go into the part of China that Germany controls. Well, all the good parts of China are spoken for. And so Roosevelt, he doesn't like that. Well, there's a group of Chinese called the Boxers, and the Boxers really don't care for the fact that there's all this Western influence there. So the Boxers are called this because of their practice in the martial arts. Now, they feel that by studying things like Confucius and by studying things like meditation, they can get themselves in like this altered state of consciousness where they can go out and they can take anyone on. And because of their refined skills in martial arts, it's as if they can place this protective shield over them and they can't be harmed. So the Boxers have what's called the Boxer Rebellion. And basically they've gone around China and they've forced people, Europeans from all different parts of Europe, into one stronghold, one fortress, if you want to call it that. And these Europeans can't get out. Well, here comes the United States to the rescue. They're going to rescue this multinational conglomerate of Europeans from this fortress, but they have to get through the Boxers. Well, the Boxers, again, they believe in this meditation, and so they come out at the U.S. soldiers, and they have this invisible force field around them that the soldiers are going to shoot their bullets, and they're just going to bounce off that force field. Well, the Boxers come out them, and the U.S. soldiers fire bullets, and the only thing they're bouncing off of is the bones after they've penetrated the bodies of these Boxers. And it's not even close. The U.S. kind of frees these people from all these European nations, and so John Hay says, okay, since the U.S. has done that, our reward is we want to open up what's called, I want to create what's known as the open door policy. And what that means is everyone in China is going to have equal trading rights. Now, there are still more notes. So this is section 1 of chapter 12. This is part 1 of chapter 12, section 3. You're going to need to watch section 2 now.